Good afternoon. Oh my gosh. Hi, Alison. Good afternoon. Yay, it's so good. So it is the afternoon. We've had lunch and a break. That means you have so many like glucose calories that your body is processing right now, and you're going to have a sugar crash. So to keep the energy up, we are as I previewed, we're going to do a tap dance. No, you thought I was joking. No. We are going to do an activity that I hope, thank you for reminding me. By the way, academics hold microphones like this, and people have been making these like rock star jokes all day that they have to hold it, but rock stars hold microphones like this. So maybe I'm going to hold the microphone like this. No. We're going to do an activity that I hope you find to be incredibly thought-provoking and rewarding. I've done this activity once myself, and I hope that you find it to be interesting as well. The activity is not just for your personal benefit and for us to steal your ideas, but also because it ties into the research projects that we're going to present to you later in the session. Does that sound good? Excellent. Yes. Yes. Okay, so the activity is 3 steps, and it's about goal reflection. So if you could find a piece of paper and a writing utensil, or borrow one from a friendly neighbor, now is the time. I want you to take 5 minutes, maybe more than 5 minutes, to list up to 20 of your core life goals. What do I mean by core life goals? I mean that things that occupy your thoughts on a routine basis, things that you deeply care about, or things that motivate your behavior and decisions. The order that you list them doesn't matter at all. They don't have to be ranked by importance, and they can be big or small, short-term or long-term. So it could be something like, I want to keep my children alive, or it could be like, I want to stop biting my nails tomorrow, or it could be, I want to meet the Splash Brothers during Game 7 of the NBA championship, or I really would like to own a Chanel blazer. Okay, so like any of those things are possible. Start making a list, and then we'll move on to step 2 in a few moments. 1-minute warning. Okay, many of you are looking up, so we're going to move on to step 2. You can keep adding to your list if more ideas pop into your mind. I won't tell. Step 2 of this exercise is to go through the goals that you listed and try and label each one with 1 or 2, and if you're going to get crazy, maybe 3 of these category labels. We have power, achievement, affiliation, thank you. Power, achievement, affiliation, personal growth and health, generativity, spirituality, and miscellaneous. And the descriptions are here. If you can put 1, 2, maybe 3 labels on each of your goals. When you're done categorizing, the final step is to turn to a neighbor, introduce yourself, because that's what this conference is all about, and share what are a couple of the goals that you wrote down. Are there certain goals that you think about more than others? And were you surprised by the number of goals you listed in a certain category or not? Talk about that with each other. Awesome. This is either incredible engagement or you guys are talking about totally unrelated things to this exercise. Either way, I think it's a win. I hope you found this exercise to be thought-provoking. What about it surprised you? Was there anything about what happened on your list that was surprising? Yeah.
I had something about not having any mortgages, and I didn't see anything that framed sort of autonomy. Mm-hmm. It was framed in terms of power over others rather than autonomy and self-control, so there was no category for that, which surprised me.
Interesting. And what about, so can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean about autonomy and not having mortgages? Do you think that it's driven by something, like it's a self-control problem, so like not buying 6 more homes?
No, it's that, I mean, for me, the only financial obligation I worry about is that banks own properties more than I do. Yeah. And if that were gone, then I wouldn't worry about it. So that's why that's the way I framed that. For different people, financial issues might be framed differently.
Interesting. Were other people feeling like there were any categories missing from the list up here? Like you were putting a lot of things in the miscellaneous category? Yeah.
Thinking a little bit about goal, like the growth mindset versus achieving goals thing. Like I've been lately training myself to think more about good habits, that's lifelong journey, and now trying to translate it back to like a goal. Just a little.
How would you reframe growth and learning? You could frame it as just that, right? Like that is a goal unto itself. Learning and growth, continual growth and learning, potentially. There's a hand up over here. Yeah.
Your spirituality definition was pretty explicit about religion. And you can be spiritual and not be an organized religion.
Like worshiping the moon. No, what do you tell me more what you mean?
I think that you can have spirituality as an important core component of yourself without believing in a specific dogma or being affiliated with a religion. So the use of religion in that as kind of the metric sort of
was narrow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. What about
I think fun and like goalless goals were missing. So like just things that are intrinsically valuable for no other reason, like travel, for instance. If you don't want to travel just for growth or anything.
Just for fun, just like hedonic goals. Yeah. Things that you just do for fun and enjoyment. Interesting. You could explicitly write that as a goal, right? Like I want to live a fun life. I want to have fun every day.
Would you put that in?
Yeah, I think.
Growth?
Yeah, and it gets back to this question of sort of there weren't these self-focused hedonic or like coping with my anxiety about mortgages, self-control type of things. I think this is a nice point.
You might feel a bit like a loser if you're writing down you want to have more fun. Like what are you doing now?
So that's very different. So that's really different, right? So like if it's focused on more fun, that's super sad. But if it's I want to have fun. Just as a general sense, I think that's quite nice. Did you have your hand up?
That's what I was going to say. I put hobby, make sure I make time for some of my hobbies, and I put that under personal growth and health, because in my mind that's part of like being a healthy person and making sure you're happy. I mean, the description certainly didn't emphasize the hedonic nature, but in my mind there should be relate. That's how I thought of it.
Would anyone else put hobbies in a different category, not in personal growth and health? Yeah.
Yeah, I put it in miscellaneous. I want to grow beautiful roses. That's not my health. I just want beautiful roses.
Any other categories that could go
I put them under achievement because some of the hobbies you just get better at. So.
That's so interesting unto itself that even with our hobbies that seem a little bit goalless, people think of them quite differently in terms of like why am I doing this? Why am I spending any time on my roses or I don't know what your hobbies are. Yeah, and so let's turn our attention. I want you to think a little.
One question on that.
No.
Okay. But like as an example there, the notion of pursuing hobbies and having to put it under achievement as opposed to mastery has a very different feel to it. it's not like you're checking off boxes, it's like it's more related to growth, and I didn't feel like that fit into the growth one the way it was framed.
So I think that some people might disagree with you, that they view hobbies as something that to achieve, that it really is like, I want to achieve this, I want to learn how to be a great painter, I want to learn how to play the guitar like an expert, that kind of thing. But we could debate about hobbies all day. This is very interesting. I want to turn our attention, pivot a little bit, and ask you about power. Was the category power, did it appear on your list at all? Yeah.
So it always appeared like it with other, like I always grouped it with other things, and it was often the power, achievement, and the generative, and those were kind of always grouped together on mine.
Do you think that they actually sort of carry together in life, or is it something in your own head that you're saying to yourself, I'm doing these things because I want multiple things? It's almost like I won't allow myself to say that I'm doing this just for power. Or do you think they really sort of correlate?
I don't think I can separate the two in my head.
Interesting.
On the same vein, I see power and affiliation. I mean, if you're working with others, including if you have a hierarchical position, you cannot only achieve if you bring in a kind of more horizontal dimension, which is more affiliation according to your matrix. So I think if you want to reach achievement through power, you need affiliation in between. So
you have to climb over people to get there.
you have to, on the contrary, you have to have a relationship with people which is of equality.
You have your approaches and I have mine. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting when you say power. It kind of sounded like an idea of dominating others, and I think the contrast that a lot of people maybe here felt was what you were talking about, autonomy, and people having agency within their community to contribute in a meaningful civic way to help others. I think that's a different sense of perhaps the same generative idea, but in a much more pro-social way.
Yeah, it's almost like, how are you going to use that power? Is it for a self-focused goal, like accumulating wealth, or just feeling a sense of power when you're at the top of an organization? Or is it about trying to achieve pro-social goals where you're going to use this power for good, to help others? Did anybody not have a single power goal? Yeah, was this surprising to you?
It was. So I'm not in academia, I'm actually in strategy consulting. So a lot of what I do and my day-to-day life is very, dominant, power-focused type A. But I think when I wrote down these and I went back and read your definition of power, how I thought about these was not coming from an angle of power, but was coming from an angle of either personal growth or development of others or achieving a certain goal in partnership with other people. So I didn't put power down as any of them.
Can I see the raise of hands again of people who did not write power at all? So I think something a little notable is that I see a lot more female hands raised. And this is a finding that I'm going to let my co-author and collaborator and colleague, Francesca, tell you a little bit about. I hope this exercise was thought-provoking and you continue to think about it as you walk away from the conference. But we're going to tell you about how we ran this exercise with thousands of people and some of the results that we found.
Thank you. So like this, it feels a bit stupid. I'm going to go with the academic part. So I want to tell you a little bit about the research that Alison and I, together with a doctoral student here, now I think a graduate, Carol Wilmuth, have conducted on this idea of looking at life goals and how they might differ for men and women. Now, just as a way of motivating the research, we were intrigued by all that has been said and written and explored on this idea of gender equality. And if I were to ask you whether you care about this issue, I would bet that most of you would actually say yes, that is probably on top of mind. Maybe if you're working in an organization or even an academic institution, is something that you've heard quite a few times. And I want to give you some data on the issue of looking at leadership positions or high-level position across a wide range of organizations from academia to others, and seeing that there are, in fact, some striking differences. So here are some recent estimates. So if you look at natural sciences, we see less than 20% of full professor being women. Interestingly, the private world, if you will, is no better. When you look at CEOs, only 5% in the list of 500 Fortune companies are women. If you look at executive officer, again, women don't fare as well as men do. And you can keep on adding and looking even outside of the United States, more globally, it seems like women do not cover top position as frequently as men, and more staying close to home. Even looking at HBS, just the number of professors, the percentage is about 25%. And I think it's a little bit lower looking at full professors compared to men being in top positions. Now, the question is, why is it that we see such differences? And this is a very complicated matter. And in the paper, we actually try to look at a potentially simple answer that has to do with preferences. Now, there are many different literatures. They span economics, management, psychology. I think pretty much every single scholar in any disciplines has written about this topic. And you can look at that very robust and wide range of studies and sort of come up with two possible categories of explanations. Some of them had to do with what economists would call supply side factors, is related to how men and women behave differently potentially at work. So some of the things or some of the studies that you can think about are studies that show that, for instance, as compared to women, men tend to have more aggressive behaviors at work. They tend to be more dominant in conversations, or they tend to negotiate more often than women. And these are type of behaviors that have been linked to having better network and also having a more successful career and having an easier time potentially climbing the organizational ladder. Now, this is one set of explanations. We can look at another set of explanations, and they have to do with what we would call demand-side factors. This is about how men and women are perceived in the workplace. So you can think about, for example, research showing that when women try to have more of an assertive style when they work with others, they actually get a penalty in how much people like them. And this might also affect other type of important behaviors in terms of how they are evaluated, promoted, or even hired that have to do with actually getting in the way of them reaching high-level positions. Now, we're sort of looking at the literature and building up these two big categories. In reality, it's very difficult to distinguish between the two. It's very likely that everything together, all these explanations are actually contributing to why is it that we see a difference in terms of men and women at the top. Now, what we want to do in this paper is suggest another possibility. And as I was telling you, since you actually just went through, the possibility is that men and women have different preferences in terms of how they think about professional advancement. And in particular, they have different preferences in terms of how they view high-level positions. Now, I'm going to stop here for just a second, and just looking at your face, I can see some that look like this. I just asked you about how you feel about this issue of gender equality. Many people find them to be at the core of what they think about on a daily basis. You might take this finding and just shut off your brain and don't listen to what I'm about to tell you. So some people might, in fact, react angrily to the research. Some have when the research actually came out. It's because I think you're looking at what we're not trying to say with this paper. So if you actually pay attention to the data, I think the data is descriptive and provides an interesting, hopefully thought-provoking way of looking at this other possibility that might explain some of the reasons why there is a difference between men and women at the top. So put the anger on the side. I'm going to try to help you do just that and listen in on what the research actually suggests. So we conducted research on over 4,000 people. We actually tried to explore different samples. So we went to college students, we went to high-level executives, we went to mid-level managers, we also went to general populations of employees. And what we asked these people to do is very similar in some of our studies to what you just did. We just asked them to list their life goals and then create categories for them. And just to preview the results, what we found is that compared to women, compared to men, women have a larger set of life goals. And when you look at in what categories these life goals are part of, we find that a smaller percentage of life goals related to power tends to be mentioned by women as compared to men. And what is interesting, I think, is that these findings hold no matter what type of methodologies you use to try to get at these findings. So we tried to do the type of method that you used, so people listing their life goals and then categorizing them. We also asked the people to select goals from categories that we gave them, or also we asked people to reject goals from a list that we gave them. And across these different methodologies, what we see consistently is that there is a difference in the number of life goals that men and women have and in the percentage of life goals that are related to achieving power. Now, I'm going to give you a flavor of some of the research so that it becomes a little bit more concrete. So this is the first study in the paper that we published. Super simple. Again, we had about 800 adults all working in the United States. And what we asked them to do is to list up to 25 life goals. We gave them a time limit within 2 minutes. And we asked them to just come up with whatever came to mind without listing them in rank of priorities. And then we presented them with the same set of categories that you just saw and asked people to choose a category for each of the goals. So only one in that case. And here's what we found. By the way, if you pay attention to the graph, the legend is in Italian. So for most of you, it's not first language. What that means is that you're deliberating more thoughtfully, research would suggest. And so the emotions stay on the side. So here's what we find. So blue is for men, red is for women. What we found is a significant difference in the way that we expected it, such that women list a greater number of goals for life than men do. And then we looked at the percentage of the goals that were listed in this category related to achieving power. And what we find is that the percentage is higher for men as compared to women. Now, we also looked at this in another way. We went to people who graduated from the MBA program here at Harvard. So we contacted 1,800 of them, and we got a good response rate. So about a third of them actually responded. We asked them to look at a survey in which we presented a ladder like this. And we told them that this ladder represents the hierarchy of professional advancement in the industry where you work. And we asked them 3 simple questions. What is their current position, if they were to use this ladder to indicate it? Their ideal position that they would like to reach throughout their career, and also the attainable position, so the highest position that they thought they could attain. And the idea here was to try to explore where the differences might be. Are there differences in terms of current position? Are there differences in terms of how desirable high-level positions are? Or are there differences in terms of how achievable these positions actually are? And what we found is that when you look at their current position, there is no difference between men and women. When you look at the ideal position, that's where we see a difference in preference, such that men believe that their ideal position is going to be higher on the ladder as compared to women. But importantly, there is no difference when it comes to how attainable the position is. So it's not that women think that they can't attain a high-level position, it's just that, I'm going to use a strong language, they don't want to as much as men do. Now, this raised some interesting questions for us as we were looking at this data as to why might that be the case. And again, there are all sorts of reasons for why this might be happening. What we thought of is that women might have different reactions when they think about the outcomes of reaching high-level positions. And in particular, if you think about positive outcomes, that you might be able to achieve when you are in a top-level positions, and negative outcomes, we might see some interesting differences between genders. So what we've done is, again, I think quite simple. We asked the people at few very diverse samples, including high-level executives, to imagine being given a promotion at work. And what is interesting, by the way, that here you see the language, a promotion that is going to give you higher levels of power, and power is described to them as control of resources over other people, which is what the literature has been talking about when relating to power. But we were also able to conduct the same type of study removing any mentioning of power, just talking about professional advancement, and the results are the same. So imagine that you were given a promotion, that you're offering promotions for a higher power position at work, and you're asked to think about the outcomes of being in such a position, and some of the outcomes are negative, so stress and anxiety, some difficult trade-off, time constraints, burden of responsibility, and conflict with other life goals. And some of them are positive, like money, happiness, job satisfaction. And these are actually the actual items that we used in our surveys. And what we find is that when we look at the positive outcomes that people expect out of high-level positions, there is no difference between men and women. Where the difference is in the negative outcomes. So women tend to see more negative outcomes as compared to men. And in particular, if you were to try to understand what's driving the process, is this item of they see conflict with either other life goals. And since that they have more, the conflict is higher for them than it is for men. We also find, consistent with the study with the latter, that men and women find the high-level position as equally attainable, but as less desirable. And they're also less likely to accept it or spend energy and effort in trying to get it because of this expected outcome. And again, variance in terms of, some variance in terms of the different populations, but the same type of effects across these measures. Now, I want to come back to the feelings of anger that you might have experienced at first when I was previewing the results. This is all descriptive. And we realized that we talked to our colleagues as well as people across organization, as well as our students. And these findings, in a sense, seem intuitive, but they are experienced, and they might be experienced for all sorts of reasons, but they're not prescriptive. They're just descriptive of how people are experiencing professional advancement. And there are all sorts of possibility going on here in terms of thinking about how we could use these findings to make some changes in policies inside of organization. It's very well possible that what is happening is that women are actually overestimating the negative outcomes. Or it's possible that, on the other side, the men are underestimating the negative consequences associated with power. It's also possible, what I loved about the exercise that we just did with Alison, you came up with all sorts of other explanations that might be interesting to explore in further research, like the idea that men and women might view power differently, that maybe for men is more of a solo activity, if you will, or is a matter of trying to establish control, and maybe women, when they think about a high-level position, they might be thinking about doing it with others or helping others or having influence, and maybe there is something to do around the framing that could help change the type of statistics that we saw at the beginning. So I'm going to stop here, and if there are burning questions that might affect the way you're going to listen to the rest of the presentations, ask them now. And if not, we can leave the questions at the end.
Non-burning questions are okay too.
Yes, I don't know whether it's what you've done next, but have you then correlated what actually has happened to what people think going to happen, like create a longitudinal study?
So that would be the golden study to run, where you actually follow people. Part of the difficulty is that you're going to run into issues where more likely women fall off out of the sample. So the closest that we got is actually at, in fact, I don't even know I told you about this, but a law firm was potentially interesting because they lose so many women at the level of promotion. But that could be really interesting. Yeah.
You control for the type of organization, because you can imagine, like, if women go into like a public entity, the return on investment would be into going and being a high-level executive in a public, like in a civil service or something, is totally different to working at a high level in a law firm or a bank or something like that. So when you're asking the same question of being an executive or a high-level person, the actual return, even if it's not measured in what you're measuring, is probably they're thinking totally different questions.
So it's interesting. When we asked the type of questions with the latter, it's actually the industry where you work, and so there might be some differences there. If anything, they would work against us in the sense that if I understand your questions correctly, then women might work in environments that are friendlier, if you will, and so they might have an easier time thinking about high-level positions. And so if that is the case, then our test is a conservative
No, it's just, if
version.
you're in a nonprofit, say if women are more likely to go into a nonprofit and men are more likely to go into consulting or finance, and you ask, do you want to be the CEO of a nonprofit or finance? Right? Your income, if you are CEO of a nonprofit, might be 3 times what your income is now. Your income, if you are CEO of a finance company, could be like 300 times what your income is now.
Yep.
And so there could be like, it could be kind of crappy, but it also, the returns could be huge, like huge differential.
Yeah, so it's interesting because we don't see differences on the positive sides. We might have enough data to try to look at the industry and see if we see any variations across. We haven't done that yet. Yeah.
I was one of the people that started the leadership practice at McKinsey, the consulting company, and as part of the work that I did there, I set up a course for senior women called the Remarkable Women Program. And what you're saying here really resonates with what I saw in the people who were on the program, because there were women who were highly valued by their companies, and there was a perception, there was a risk they might leave, and the companies wanted to invest in these women to have them carry on. And it wasn't that they didn't have the positive associations with progression. It was exactly as you say, it was the sense that they would have to give up something that was important to them. And a lot of the work on the program was to help them find, authenticity is a word that's overused perhaps, but an authentic path forward that made them feel like it was possible to be themselves while progressing further. So, in other words, finding a different way of expressing power that felt comfortable for them. And it occurs to me that we've got a lot of alumni who've been through that program, so if you want to do any qualitative work, since we have cited work by you, I'm sure that they would be willing to give back.
Thank you for the offer. We're definitely going to follow up. Yes, so there have been very interesting conversations since this paper got published, and some of them are conversations that I thought were quite surprising, but also in line with what you're saying of, for instance, a recent one of high-level executives in the pharmaceutical industry saying that she struggled a lot trying to hire and also promote women. And when she was sitting down with them and would ask them, why is it I'm trying to help you? Why is it that you don't even are trying hard enough for this promotion? They would say, I don't want to have your life. Yeah, exactly. And again, it could be they might have different ideas of what that entails, or they might actually be for real that, in fact, they knew enough to say, I don't want to have that life. Yeah. Yeah.
You say it's overestimating or underestimating, but maybe it's real.
Yeah.
Like maybe it really is that women have more of a conflict with their home life because.
Yes.
I just not sure I like
it's,
that.
You're perfectly correct. It could be real, and it could be real for a good reason, where people, I'm going to say something very politically incorrect, where people are actually spending energy in the activities that they like, versus they're doing so as a reactions to societal norms for accepted roles. And so there is a really interesting, deep and profound and difficult question to answer. If we're taking this seriously, where do you go with that? I actually presented, so as you can tell from my handling, I'm Italian, and I presented this work in Italy, where there is a huge debate about, they're called the pin quotes, which means making sure that you have certain percentages of women represented across all levels. And they were just furious because they thought I was implying something that I'm not implying. So again, they're descriptive, and a lot more is needed, the type of study that you're suggesting, to uncover how we can best use these findings to inform potential policies. Yeah.
I was struck by, you mentioned that there's a statistical difference in the latter between where men and women want to go. But what's striking to me is that they both want to be over 9, right? So the average would itself very high. So what that seems to suggest to me is there's a large number of women that want to be right near but not at the top. Yeah. But more men who are happy to be at the top. So this concept of leadership, I think in consulting firms we talk about, moving toward partnership models and so forth. There's actually there's not one leader, there's many leaders, and they kind of exist in kind of a set of tiers. So what do you think your research says about a more nuanced understanding of not being the one, but one of near the top?
Yeah, so I don't want to draw too many inferences from that one study because we sampled graduates of Harvard Business School, and so it's unclear whether that's really representative of the world, and I could make arguments for yes and no. Possibly not. So maybe we need a little bit of a more varied sample populations for that type of study, but it's interesting. And again, it could be related to the fact that maybe you see leadership positions that involve many others, where there is quite a bit of research suggesting that when you are at the very top, you are in fact a bit lonely. Okay, I'm looking at the time, so let's shift back to Alison. Thank you.
I just want to add 2 things because it's so hard to sit and watch someone present work that you've done too. But I love watching.
Did I upset you?
I'm so mad. I'm also that person with the angry face. No, not at all. I just wanted to note that the point number 1 on this slide is exactly what you're saying, is that there's a very good chance that people are getting it exactly right. We just don't know because we were unable to measure accuracy, but I leave that open to many of the brilliant minds in this room to try and figure out. The other thing that we really tried to do is we went younger and younger with our samples. So we started out with sort of high executives to see what their preferences were because they're people who are likely to be in these positions already. And then we went younger, we went to MBAs who are really thinking about the trajectory of their whole career. Then we went to college students. We thought going to college students, man, these people are really progressive. They haven't encountered these sort of life challenges yet. Maybe they won't be showing it, and yet they still show these differences in preferences. So if it would be great to see even younger and younger, like when do these preferences form in your life? At what age? Do children show these things? Is it learned that early? We don't know, but it would be really neat to find out. Okay, so I know Francesca showed you the angry face and she said to set it aside. So please keep your anger simmering on a back burner for a little bit longer. I am also going to share the findings from a paper that might make you feel quite frustrated. They make me feel quite frustrated. And this is looking at the role of gender in entrepreneurship. Why should we care about entrepreneurship at all? It turns out that entrepreneurship is a central path to job creation and economic growth, and there is a whole field devoted to figuring out the impact of entrepreneurship and innovation on economic outcomes, and it does, in fact, matter quite a bit. The findings I'm going to share with you today were in collaboration with some amazing co-authors. Laura Huang, who is a professor at Wharton, who does lots of research on entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial pitching. Sarah Carney, who is my identical twin sister, she is not an academic, but she is a practicing entrepreneur, and she approached us with this idea and problem and said, I'd really like to figure this out, like what's going on here. And then Fiona Murray, who is a faculty member at MIT Sloan. She is the director of the Innovation Initiative at MIT, which is sort of the backbone of the entire university there, so she's amazing. So we were interested in, what is gender doing in entrepreneurship? Why are there so few female entrepreneurs? And those that do exist, the ones that you can probably think of, are all running fashion and cosmetics companies, most of them. So why is this happening? This is a hard question to answer because for this very reason that there aren't that many of them, so how can we study them? It's a sort of selection problem, sort of like Francesca was mentioning. They disappear as things move upward, so you can't study them. So here's what we did. We analyzed pitches given at the 3 largest entrepreneurial pitch competitions across the United States across 3 years. I've summarized this in one bullet point up on the slide, but this really was a huge effort to get these pitch competitions to allow us to videotape all of the entrepreneurs and to give us the contest outcomes. So for those of you who are not familiar with pitch competitions, you collect a bunch of people who go and pitch their company ideas to a panel of angel investors, and the people who win actually get funding for their companies, and it is very, very helpful for seed funding to get their companies off the ground. So we analyzed the pitches given at the 3 largest pitch competitions over 3 years. We not only had videos of the entrepreneurs giving their pitches and the outcomes of the competition, so who won, but we also had a separate panel of angel investors watch the videos and rate the entrepreneurs on physical attractiveness and a number of other interesting measures. So here's what we found. Compared to female entrepreneurs, the men were 60% more likely to achieve success in the entrepreneurial pitch competitions. If I'm doing my math correctly, that means 40% of the winners were women. So this is a little bit striking. That's a pretty big difference between genders. But you might be thinking to yourself, maybe men really are better at pitching. Maybe their company ideas are better. Maybe they're more persuasive in public speaking, this type of thing. So here's a sort of graph of the outcomes. It wasn't just gender that mattered, but also physical attractiveness. So here, physical attractiveness didn't matter among the female entrepreneurs who were pitching their companies, but among the men, physically attractive men were much more likely to get funding. All right, so this is initial sort of correlational evidence that gender and physical attractiveness might matter. As I said, it might be the case that handsome men actually are better at pitching their ideas, or they have better ideas. So we wanted to take this into a more controlled lab setting to find out if that was indeed the case. So are handsome men better at pitching their ideas? We asked 700 people to watch some entrepreneurial pitch videos. These videos were pitch decks that we got from real entrepreneurs at MIT. So when you watch a pitch video like this, you don't see the entrepreneur at all. You just see a series of photos and graphs and somebody narrating on top of it. This helps us a lot to control for things that you can't control for in live pitch competitions, like body language, pacing around, things like this. Okay, they heard a voice narrating each pitch, and the script stayed the same. So it was either a male voice or a female voice narrating the pitch, and the videos looked something like this. And then they saw a photo of the entrepreneur, and it was either highly attractive or highly unattractive. This was not my personal opinion, but based on some pilot testing from lots of people. It turns out there's incredible consensus around attractiveness if you're interested in that kind of thing. Then they went on to choose which company to fund with their own real money. So this was in a second study, or they rated the likelihood of investment in a third study. And very, very importantly, the pitch scripts were exactly the same, identical across the videos. We just manipulated the voice, the gender of the voice of the narrator, and whether that person had an attractive or unattractive photo attached with their voice. Does that make sense? Great. Okay, here's what we found. 68% of people chose to fund a venture pitched by a male voice. This is even more dramatic than we saw in the pitch competitions in real life, quote unquote, real life. And this is both men and women alike. So it's not like men are choosing men and women are trying to help women. Everybody is picking the ventures pitched by a male voice. And it wasn't just the men, it was especially the handsome men. So again, we saw that physical attractiveness did not have an effect on persuasiveness, but the highly attractive male was much more likely to be invested in. All right, and remember, the scripts and the ideas were exactly the same across all of these pitch videos. The only thing that changed was the gender of the narrator and what they look like. So here's the summary. Male entrepreneurs, especially attractive ones, are more likely to receive investor funding than are female entrepreneurs. This troll down here is supposed to be an unattractive woman. My sister drew this cartoon, so we can blame her for any misunderstanding. So this is based on their gender and physical attractiveness and not on the content of their ideas. I told you you'd be a little bit mad. All right, so something that I think that these findings are very, very important to identify, like where does gender bias live, especially in an important context like entrepreneurship. There are many questions that we did not answer, we haven't answered yet, and I'm hoping that we can have a little bit of a discussion about what open questions are still out there. So first, why is something like this happening? Why would people be preferring male entrepreneurs over female entrepreneurs? Do you have any ideas? Yeah.
I was wondering about the nature of the businesses as well. Mm-hmm. If they're kind of male, female, preponderant. Mm-hmm. What were the businesses they were pitching?
Mm-hmm. So it's a great question. So in the videos that we use, we tried to pick gender neutral industries because I think I share your intuition that maybe there's some sort of congruency effect where a man pitching a masculine company might be more persuasive than a woman, and a woman pitching a cosmetics or fashion company might be more persuasive, which in fact might be the case. The dangerous and confusing part is that most work industries are masculine typed in everyone's heads. Like this is part of our norms and our stereotypes. So like if you think of almost any industry, I think you can make an argument that it's pretty masculine. So the industries that we used in these were like bioengineering type of stuff, and some other, I'm trying to remember now. Oh, one of them was a nonprofit though that was helping people recycle, that kind of thing. So there were a few different ones, and we tried to find gender neutral things. But am I right that this is your intuition that maybe there's some sort of congruency thing going on? Yeah.
So the intonation and the voices, perhaps, kind of that bubbles up some confidence. If it's just been read and wrote, and it's not actually by somebody who's going to carry out the business,
yeah.
Then I just wonder if you could just kind of voice analysis to see if there's kind of micro intonation that would sway people.
Yeah. So
micro expressions, micro intonation, kind of getting a head around this now that this can actually
definitely.
Be persuasive.
It's so interesting that you asked that. So when we were running these studies, we pilot tested the narration to make sure that they didn't differ on other dimensions other than gender or tonality. So like where is your voice located? And they didn't differ on other things like energy or other things that might passion or other things that might matter. But right now, one of the things that we're doing, and this is in collaboration with Mike Norton and Katie DeCellis, we're thinking about trying to test the effectiveness of voice modulation software. So it's literally the exact same person. And this woman has developed software that live, like as you talk into the phone, it modulates your voice to make you sound female or male, and in a way that is not just sounding like a weird computerized thing, but rather to actually sound like a real person, and it really is quite realistic. And so we are now testing to see, can this change outcomes when it comes to recruitment? It's very similar to sort of what a lot of Iris's work and what's in her book about, so like the orchestra, when you pull down the curtain, outcomes change, and it turns out that we tend to, hire a lot more female violinists when we don't know their gender. But this is sort of with a technology that could actually be scalable, right? That a lot of people could use in a phone interview to try and reduce gender bias. Yeah. Evan.
So really interesting data. I mean, to me, I think even more interesting than the attractive men is why does attractiveness not help women?
Yeah.
I mean, we hear about, classic psych research, attractiveness is such a robust advantage. Do you have a hunch of why that is? And in fact, I mean, it wasn't significant, but it looked like, if anything, the trend of memes was in the opposite direction in the last figure.
So I have a hunch, but I'll ask you first, and maybe other ideas from the room. Do you have a hunch about why?
No.
Yeah, it's very surprising. Do other people have guesses about why? Yeah.
No, it's just another thing. Maybe it's also interesting to look at what kind of human beings the business angels are.
Let's return to the question of what kind of human beings these are. I want to get to people's hunches about why doesn't physical attractiveness matter among women. So that was a really strong hypothesis we had, is that it's like really going to matter for women, and then it didn't matter at all. Yeah, what do you think?
I think that there might be some perceptions that attractive women are less smart.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
but then wouldn't we see a decrement in attractiveness for women?
So it's not statistically significant, but it's
directionally
it's
is
directionally
consistent.
in that direction.
Yep, so it was not significant, so I don't want to over-interpret it, but it was directionally consistent with that. There is a little bit of research about a beauty penalty, and it particularly pertains to women, but I think, again, it depends on context. So if you get a really attractive woman pitching a cosmetics company, that might be very, very persuasive. Other ideas?
Maybe it's the characteristics that you think you need to have to be successful don't vary by attractiveness, but do vary by gender.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it depends how charitable you want to be towards these VCs or angel investors.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it is that they're completely, sex and attractiveness blind, but they've internalized all this other research around other people being sexist. And so if there's a perception that like women don't work hard, or women have to look after kids, or women have to aren't able to be aggressive or assert themselves, then they're factoring that into their decision about who it is that they want to safeguard their investment. And if you think that entrepreneurs need to hire a team and motivate staff and do all those other things that don't vary by attractiveness, then you're not going to factor it into your decision making.
We have arrived at the most depressing part of all of this research, is that maybe they're getting it right. So investors, their job is to try and pick the venture that is going to be the most successful and most profitable. And if women, maybe particularly attractive women, are poised to encounter more gender bias the entire way along their startup career, then perhaps it is rational, quote unquote, to invest in male ventures more than female ventures. David.
So in your experiments, I'm sorry, did the participants think that the person reading was the entrepreneur?
Yes.
They did.
They did.
Okay, so what would your prediction be if it was not the entrepreneur, but just someone you had reading? That was either a man or a woman or attractive.
An omniscient narrator. I'm not sure. Do you have a hypothesis?
Well, my
Like,
hypothesis
here's
is
your
that it
mom.
certainly let you test this idea.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it's a rational response to other people's anticipated biases,
Yeah.
it should vanish when you're just when it's not the entrepreneur.
And you keep them blind to who is the leader of the actual company. I like that. Very nice. Yeah.
Is it possible that your panels, I'm guessing are probably more men than women, are aware of the appearance bias with the women, and they are intentionally trying to get past it to make good decisions, whereas they are not as aware of the bias of the attractive men?
I wish that were the case, but in our both lab studies or big online panels, we had actually gender-balanced people making decisions, gender-balanced participants. But your intuition is right. With the angel investors in the field study, there were more men than women. What I found really surprising about this is that women spend so much time and resources on working on their appearance, right? Like doing their hair in the morning and makeup and clothes, etc. And men, at least to my greatest knowledge, don't spend nearly as much time or effort or thought or attention on this kind of thing. And what we're finding is that maybe they should. because it matters. It matters for them. It matters more for them. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's beyond the scope of this study, and Francesca, when you presented it, but what do you do with this kind of finding? I mean, one approach says, like, you just take a female VC with a great idea and say, like, just find the cutest guy you know and send him to TechCrunch. Or, like you say, what we need to do is we need a bunch of VCs who say, like, from now on, we're only reviewing pitch decks, we're not letting people talk to us, and then we're making decisions. Like, I mean, I know this is a depressing finding for you too, and, like, what do you do with it?
So it is depressing from a sort of personal standpoint that I want women to feel empowered and to be successful, but your question gets at a really, really deep question that I always ruminate about when I'm listening to gender talks, which is, what is the end goal? Are we aiming for parity? Do we wish that there were equal numbers of men and women leading startup companies? Is it right? So it really depends on your goal. So like we were saying, if the goal is to choose companies that are most poised to be most successful, irrespective of who is leading them, then the solution for this is very complex and not straightforward. Another possible goal other than parity could be let's get both for gender and racial diversity. Do we want something that is sort of representative of the culture of our culture? And like what culture? Is it national culture? Is it broadly worldwide culture? That kind of big questions. Michael.
Just a thought on that. There was just an article about how much Trump and Clinton are paying men and women on their staffs. And the headlines were, and it's interesting actually to hear like, what are we trying to maximize? So I believe what they showed was Trump has fewer women, like a very small percent of women compared to the Clinton campaign. And the gap, the pay ratio is way bigger for Trump than for Clinton. So Clinton pays men and women roughly exactly the same, and Trump, there's a huge gap. So those were what the headlines were about, but it's actually kind of interesting because if you look at the data, Trump's paying everyone more. Mm-hmm. So weirdly, as a woman, you'd make more if you weren't for Trump, but the gap is bigger. Mm-hmm. So it's like the number of people is smaller, the absolute pay is higher, but the gap is bigger. Or the number of people is the same, sort of. There's no gap, but you're getting paid less. And it just made me think about
what's better?
Yeah, like how do you trade those off?
Yeah.
I think we probably had intuition what's better, but leaving the specifics aside.
And who is happier? Like
Yeah,
the
like
women on his campaign, or like the 100 women who are potentially more stressed and not being paid as much on the Clinton campaign? Yeah, I don't know. I'm looking at. I have to go to Iris. Yes.
So I don't have an answer to the Trump-Clinton problem, but I am wondering whether your data would allow you to get a bit of a sense of your question of whether it's rational. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, you never have data on the non-chosen ones, right? So you always have that problem. So we very rarely have that luxury. But could you, given that they have already given you the data, could you follow these companies? Mm-hmm. Right? And so for example, there's some wild theories. So fewer women are chosen, but the ones are superstars. Yeah. Right? That's the higher threshold theory. Yeah. So therefore, 5 out of 10 women succeed, but only 1 out of 10 men succeed, because we apply a different threshold. Yeah. Or is there more noise, more variance among the men or among the women, or I think maybe following them. Again, it's not perfect because we don't know the non-chosen ones, but maybe you can get a bit of a sense, at least, to answer your question whether it's rational.
I would love that. Yeah, that sounds amazing. Can I count you in as a collaborator? That's a no. Okay.
I wonder, like, it'd be really interesting to understand the cognitive mechanisms that are underpinning their kind of prospective analysis. If it's rational, then it's probably some sort of Bayesian analysis. And so what you could do is you could offer one group, like, clear data saying, you know, the women are just as likely as the men to have successful startups. So you give them like analytic data that's rational and that they would use really well. And then in the other, you could give them a narrative, right? So you could say, you could show them Sheryl Sandberg or say something, just prime them with a successful woman and see if the change is there. Because in actual fact, so just on your research that the research you were discussing in India with the women leaders, they did something very similar. They gave women and men the same policy to read, and in the villages that had women leaders for like 7 years, the men were much less likely to discriminate against a policy that was read by a woman than by the men. So what was coming to mind for the men was a women leader, and then they were less likely to be discriminatory. So it would be interesting whether it's a rational thing going on or just a narrative thing of what comes to mind, and much more behavioral thing, really.
Yeah, no, I love it. That's so great. There's this really nice paper by Sridhari Desai and Dolly Chugg that came out recently that's very, very different than what you described, but a similar theme, where they study the gender roles of people at home. So like, do you have a traditional marriage with your spouse? And then measured people's attitudes towards gender in the workplace. And what they found is that men who are in traditional marriages at home are much more disapproving of, or sort of not as favorable to women in the workplace because of this dissonance thing. They think that they have an ideal setup, so they're kind of like, what are you doing here? But it's about changing norms and changing people's mindsets. So I'm going to hand the microphone over to Elizabeth, who has very uplifting and exciting data to share with you at this point. Thanks so much, guys. Can I grab that?
Okay. Okay, hi everybody. I'm Elizabeth. I'm super excited to be here. Not just because that's how I'm supposed to reinterpret my nervousness. I'm going to present two papers. We're shifting a little bit away from gender diversity into racial diversity. And these are two papers that kind of take a step back and say, what can we do earlier on in the workforce pipeline to think about diversity in the workplace and specifically in government. The two papers that I'm going to present to you, oops. Oh no, you can't see my picture. Oh well. The two papers are about the police, and obviously police diversity has been a pretty important politically salient topic, not just in the U.S. over the past couple of years, but also across the world, where policymakers are coming out, committing to increasing diversity of the police. And then the question that we always get from city governments is, okay, how can we actually do this? So the first paper really focuses on that initial point in the process. How do we get more people to actually apply to the police? And how do we get different people to apply to the police? So it turns out that the question of attraction in the public management literature has an answer to this question. And we've been basically using this answer for 20 to 25 years. And that's a model of public service motivation. So I'm sure a lot of you have read the research. The model says basically people that have higher levels of public service motivation are more attracted to positions in government. And we see this correlationally in a whole bunch of different fields. So we do see that people that have higher levels of public service motivation are more likely to be in government jobs. And then what seems to have happened is this theoretical leap that says something like, if you are more likely to be in government because you're public service motivated, then we should highlight public service motivation in recruitment material and in job advertisement and in our entire pitch about working for the government. So in the police, this is very clear. If you look at the top police forces across the US, the majority of them that have some sort of messaging on their HR page say something like, come serve, come protect your community, come benefit your community, answer the call. The messages are all around public service motivation. And even if you look at kind of the US federal discussion about how do we get more people into government, how do we deal with this ticking time bomb of the baby boomers retiring and nobody being attracted to government position, it seems like scholars are still answering that question by saying, look, we need agencies to show a pathway to purpose. Now, what we've done in this study is said, let's think a little bit more about the role of the specific job advertisement in that process. So if you think that there are multiple ways through which you get information about a job, it's possible that you already know that working for government is a public service. In fact, if you've grown up in my generation, that's all you hear. Just go across the river to the Kennedy School. The basic message that you get is that working for government is a public service. And so the marginal value of repeating that message in a job advertisement might actually be quite small. What I want to argue in this paper is that actually, if you want the job advertisement to nudge new people that wouldn't have applied already to a government job, you need to focus on other parts, potentially of intrinsic motivation, but definitely other job characteristics. So the way we've structured this and said is saying, what is new, but still realistic in terms of the job characteristics of being a police officer, and what is non-trivial to the type of person you want to attract, and that's important. So for some people, a non-trivial job characteristic is, flexible work. For other people, it might be Diet Coke and a foosball table. Really depends on who you're trying to attract. So what we did is we worked with the Chattanooga Police Department in Tennessee, and we said, can we try to recruit new people to your police force by sending them postcards? The postcards look something like this. I don't know if you can read. This is Worley. He's a real police officer. And we sent 4 versions of a postcard, and we also had a control group. The first one said, are you up for the challenge? And basically said, if you're the kind of person who thrives in a challenging environment, you're just the kind of person we're looking for. And I'm happy to talk about all the behavioral choices we made when setting up these postcards. The second was the standard one that the police wanted to go with. So a service message, are you ready to serve? If you're the kind of person who wants to serve your community, you're just the person we're looking for. The third was a twist on the service message that was supposed to focus on people of color, that asked, just think what it would mean to you and your community if you became a police officer. And you'll understand a little bit why we chose this message. And the fourth focused on career benefits. So saying, this isn't a job, it's a career. If you're looking for a long-term career, you're just the kind of person we're looking for. So when we asked the police officers, what do you think is most effective? Of course, people both in the HR department and in the leadership assumed that the most effective message would be one of service. And we've seen this time and time again. People absolutely believe and have been socialized to believe that the main reason people are in the police is because of this motivation to serve the public. Well, it turns out, and I apologize to the non-economists in the room, that the service message or the impact message, these messages that are focusing on community service, are no more effective at getting people to apply to the police force than the control group. Now, I want to emphasize, I think the reason that is the case is because those people are applying anyway, not because it's not a powerful motivator in government. What we find is actually that the challenge message, so telling people that this is a challenging job, is twice as effective at getting people to apply. And if you look at people of color specifically, the challenge message is even more effective, and the career message is also effective. So our samples on kind of who is a person of color and applying were small. So if you kind of put these results together, what we find is that messages that make personal benefits more salient, so this is challenging or you're going to develop skills, are 3 times as effective as messages that focus on benefits to the community. So the way I think about these results is to say, look, this is just proof of concept, that we can expand beyond the standard public service model of attraction, and we can think about other ways and other reasons why new and different people might be attracted to a frontline worker job. And of course, the million-dollar question, which I don't have the answer for, is what happens over time. So we'll be following these people over time to see, are they less likely to quit? Are they more likely to be successful? Are they happier in their jobs? But that's, I guess, in time too. The second paper takes the next step in the pipeline. So let's say now we've managed to get a diverse pool of applicants. What happens in the recruitment process to get the right people through the process, and how can we support candidates, especially candidates from a diverse background, to achieve on the assessment tasks and on the recruitment tasks? And it was great to hear so much amazing research earlier today about this area. There is a lot of incredibly interesting research around the systems of evaluation. So the system being biased, the assessors being biased. But we were working with a UK police force where the part of the process where they saw this disproportionate drop in non-white applicants was during an online test with an automated scoring system. So they were a bit baffled. They had chosen the questions because they thought they weren't supposed to be racially tinged. But the question that we were trying to answer was, is there something we can do to support this process, to reduce the racial achievement gap that's really not about the test itself or about the system, but about what people feel and experience right before taking the test? So I don't need to tell anyone in this room about stereotype threat. But what I was really interested with this paper was this idea of belonging uncertainty. So in a recruitment context, the entire assessment process in some way is you checking the person-organization fit and trying to make a decision about whether or not you're going to belong in an organization. And it's possible that people of socially stigmatized groups are more uncertain of the quality of those bonds, of whether or not they're going to belong. And in fact, in the literature, it's called a hypothesis, not a belief. And that's good news. The optimistic message is, if it's just a hypothesis that can be updated in the Bayesian sense, we can provide positive cues of social belonging, and that should affect how people perform on these tasks. So what we wanted to do was change the email that people saw right before they took the test, and see if that would affect their performance by providing these positive cues of belonging, taking out negative cues of non-belonging, you'll see what I mean in a second, reduce the relevance of stereotype in some sense. And we also wanted to include this literature around values affirmation that many of you know about, that suggests that getting people to think about their values right before they take a test can have significant effects on people of color, on first-generation college students, so people who traditionally are either underrepresented in the environments that they're in or in some way socially stigmatized. So this is the control email. It's pretty standard HR language for those of you that work in this space. But you can see these slight cues that potentially suggest non-belonging. So things like, you will not be contacted again. Please note there's no appeals process. Or in the belonging uncertainty space, if you have any queries about why you have been asked to take this assessment, please contact so-and-so. So what we did is we tried to change that. So first we tried to make the stereotype itself less relevant by saying, congratulations, you've successfully completed this process, you've been selected. We talked about reducing anxiety, so added these small cues like when you're ready. And then we added this sentence from drawing from the values affirmation literature that said, before you start the test, I'd like you to take some time to think about what it would mean to be a police officer and what it would mean to you and your community. And here are the results. So for white applicants, the treatment had no effect. So if you felt welcome before, you continue to feel welcome if you're white. But for people of color, and this is Black and minority ethnic candidates in the UK, we see a 50% increase in the probability of passing the test. So we effectively eliminate the gap in racial achievement at this stage in the process just by changing the language that they see right before they take the test. Now, unfortunately, and this is the relatively frustrating part of the conversation, this is not going to solve racism in the police. But what it does suggest is that there are probably many other pain points in the process, especially in recruitment, but definitely after recruitment as well, where if we think of them in a meaningful way with this kind of lens and with a behavioral lens, we can probably start tugging away at a larger problem, and hopefully, if at each pain point we're improving the performance of candidates that are people of color or women or other underrepresented groups, over time, hopefully we'll be able to see a change in the overall diversity of the police. So I'll stop there and take questions.
In the first study, presumably the population you were looking at was young, because they were early applicants, right? Do you think the same factors would, if you were in another environment where you might have age diversity, would it work the same for other generations? Because there's a lot of talk about how younger generations are more interested in personal development and so forth and so on. Do you think that would still hold, or would that be mitigated?
So I definitely think the model is very context specific and generation specific. So I think, and I don't know if this is true, but people of an older generation understood government jobs as job security or where the smart people go. So when I've spoken to Kennedy School professors about this, who graduated in the 60s, the government job was where the smart kids go. And so a message about serving the public is incredibly powerful in that setting. Or if you think about Google today, right? A message that says, come save the world is incredibly powerful because the standard message is, you're the smart kids. So I do think it's age specific. I'm not sure in the police if, in this specific context, if we'd see a big difference. We controlled for age. It didn't seem to be hugely important, but our range, as you mentioned, is between 20 and 50, basically. So not older than, we did have some older candidates.
First applicants?
Yeah. So that's why the police is an interesting one, because you don't have to have specific training to join the police. Yeah.
So
So you say it's very context specific, but you must know the similarities to the Zambia study suggesting, that if you advertise on career versus public service, you get more qualified people. So, I mean, I think it's just amazing that you're finding a similar result across, one's health workers, one's police, one's Zambia, one's the US.
Yeah, absolutely. So that Zambia study, I think, is actually one of the first ones to make this claim in a way that's incredibly meaningful, because community health workers might even be a harder sell. So telling community health workers you should focus on career aspirations rather than serving your community and finding these huge effects is really exciting. But yeah, the good news is that more and more people are thinking about this, and job advertisements are such a low-cost intervention that we can actually test to figure out what that threshold is. So I make a claim about a model of non-trivial, but we don't actually know what that means, where the threshold of new and non-trivial and context-specific messaging is. But we can test job advertisements quite quickly, which is exciting. Yeah.
I have a question. Did you survey those people about what other options did they consider, especially fire and military and firefighters? For example, if I consider going to service, I would be like, okay, well, I'm going to service, but then I would think, they are more or less similar. And, military is very good in advertising the benefits.
Mm-hmm.
So did you ask them to compare those three, at least those three or any other, other things that they consider?
So we didn't, but I think that's a really good kind of line of research to think about what you're comparing to when you're making a decision. And in the same way that it can be context-specific generationally, you can imagine that as I'm looking at my other opportunity set, that's a really important comparison, right? To think about, if I'm only looking at public service jobs, then a job that talks about career benefits is really specific. If I'm only looking at jobs that give you a certain job security, maybe the service message is going to be really effective. I think the right way to start testing that is moving away from the police into professions where you've already invested in a profession, so like teaching or medicine, where the opportunity set is more fixed, and then seeing how that difference plays out. But I'm actually quite excited to look into that next. Yeah.
So, I find your second study amazing, and it was just also how much you find. Yeah. But I'm actually just going to tell an anecdote prompted by the questions that we just had on Zambia and the military. So when I go to Zurich Airport, and many of you must have flown to that airport too, there's a big advertisement by UBS. And I don't think anyone has evaluated, maybe they have, but they're very much investing in a different strategy from yours, meaning they're in a sector where it wasn't traditionally public service motivation that motivated people to go and become an investment banker. So now the advertisement says a good banker is a good father. And it said she shows a father, take the weekend off, playing with his kids, etc. And their whole advertisement is around a good banker is somebody who does good things for the world. Yeah. And maybe they learned about your novice research. It just. Yeah.
So I think so. I bet they do a little bit of testing themselves, but I think that's exactly the right fault. That's exactly kind of in line with what I think the model is here. So if you become a teacher, you've already signaled to the world that you're a good person, and you're trying to signal something else. I'm smart, or whatever the case may be. For investment bankers, you've already signaled a whole bunch of other stuff, so you might want to be like, but I'm a good father.
But is that brand management really, though? Are they managing their brand rather than recruiting someone? Yeah.
Deb Small has.
I have no idea what it was.
No.
Yeah.
I'm just noticing that.
Yeah.
So Deb Small, who gave a talk earlier in the philanthropy session, has this great work about bragging. So it's not on an organizational level, but when bragging generally is not a good idea. But the one time that bragging actually is effective is when you're emphasizing something that someone wouldn't have anticipated about you. So something that is surprising to them. That's unique and different and surprising. So it's sort of like on an individual level of this. Yeah, it's really interesting. Thank you all so much for coming.
Good afternoon. Oh my gosh. Hi, Alison. Good afternoon. Hey, it's so good. So it is the afternoon. We've had lunch and a break. That means you have so many glucose calories that your body is processing right now, and you're going to have a sugar crash. So to keep the energy up, we are as I previewed, we're going to do a tap dance. No, you thought I was joking. No, we are going to do an activity that I hope. Thank you for reminding me. By the way, academics hold microphones like this, and people have been making these like rock star jokes all day that they have to hold it, but rock stars hold microphones like this. So maybe I'm going to hold the microphone like this. No. We're going to do an activity that I hope you find to be incredibly thought-provoking and rewarding. I've done this activity once myself, and I hope that you find it to be interesting as well. The activity is not just for your personal benefit and for us to steal your ideas, but also because it ties into the research projects that we're going to present to you later in the session. Does that sound good? Excellent. Yes. Yes. Okay, so the activity is 3 steps, and it's about goal reflection. So if you could find a piece of paper and a writing utensil, or borrow one from a friendly neighbor, now is the time. I want you to take 5 minutes, maybe more than 5 minutes, to list up to 20 of your core life goals. What do I mean by core life goals? I mean that things that occupy your thoughts on a routine basis, things that you deeply care about, or things that motivate your behavior and decisions. The order that you list them doesn't matter at all. They don't have to be ranked by importance, and they can be big or small, short-term or long-term. So it could be something like, I want All right, 1 minute warning. When you're done categorizing, the final step is to turn to a neighbor, introduce yourself, because that's what this conference is all about, and share what are a couple of the goals that you wrote down. Are there certain goals that you think about more than others? And were you surprised by the number of goals you listed in a certain category or not? Talk about that with each other. Okay, many of you are looking up, so we're going to move on to step 2. You can keep adding to your list if more ideas pop into your mind. I won't tell. Step 2 of this exercise is to go through the goals that you listed and try and label each one with 1 or 2, and if you're going to get crazy, maybe 3 of these category labels. We have power, achievement, affiliation, thank you. Power, achievement, affiliation, personal growth and health, generativity, spirituality, and miscellaneous. And the descriptions are here. If you can put 1, 2, maybe 3 labels on each of your goals. Want to keep my children alive, or it could be like I want to stop biting my nails tomorrow, or it could be I want to meet the Splash Brothers during Game 7 of the NBA championship, or I really would like to own a Chanel blazer. Okay, so like any of those things are possible. Start making a list, and then we'll move on to step 2 in a few moments.